Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for the 11th General Meeting and Technical Session of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, Eastern Province branch of Saudi Arabia. This is actually part of a series of technical sessions being organized by the NSC Eastern Province of Saudi Arabia branch to enlighten its members and the general public. Today's technical session actually is on a very important topic, catastrophic flood event, who is to blame? This will be presented by our erudite scholar, Professor Dr. Salihu Lukman, who is happened to be Assistant Professor of Civil Engineering at the University of Habr al-Batin here in Saudi Arabia. So without much ado, I will ask the chairman of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, Eastern Province branch, Professor Engineer Abdullahi Masoud, who is Associate Professor of Electrical and Electronics Engineering at the University of Jubail here in Saudi Arabia, to give his opening remarks. Professor Abdullahi Masoud, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Engineer Alhaji Muhammad, for the introduction. Good evening to one and all. It is my delight and pleasure to welcome you to our 11th General Meeting and Technical Session of the Nigerian Society of Engineers Eastern Province branch. And this is the pioneer branch in Saudi Arabia. First and foremost, just as a reminder, you are all aware that the inauguration of the branch will come up on the 10th of November, 2023. Already, inauguration committee has been formed, and the committee and subcommittees have been diligently working to ensure a seamless ceremony. So I want to use this opportunity to appreciate everyone for this effort, and please kindly consider that this is indeed actually a service to engineering, and it will never go unnoticed. Also, to our members, I know you have been very supportive. You have always been supportive of the branch, and please do not relent on that. Please keep working hard on this issue. As usual, also, I would like to express my gratitude to the President and Chairman of Council of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, that's Engineer Tasi Wudil, and the Executive Secretary of the Society, Engineer Joshua Ebedi, for their assistance and tireless effort in ensuring that our branch is registered. We are now registered as the 84th branch of the NSC. Also, I would like to say that this is our 11th meeting with the technical session. Presenter today, Dr. Salihu Engineer Professor Salihu Lukman, MNSC, a civil engineer from University of Afrobatin. We are happy to say that, or we are proud to say that the presenter is one of our own. Dr. Salihu is a well-known individual, especially in the social media anyway. He has made a number of such presentations in the kingdom and in Nigeria. Most of his past presentations, anyway, I've attended some of them. They have been well structured and very informative. You're welcome, sir. And we want to appreciate you for sparing time to come despite your tight schedules. The topic of today is a catastrophic flood event, which is who is to blame. This is actually a hot topic nowadays, especially in developing countries. And I'm sure that we are all going to learn a lot from the speaker's vast experience and knowledge. So without much ado, I will stop and very warmly invite our technical secretary, Engineer Dr. Maiz, to read the citation of the speaker. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Maiz. Dr. Moise, are you listening?
I think Dr. Moise is not with us. Maybe his connection or something.
Okay. In fact, that was what we should have checked from the beginning anyway. I'm not sure, but let me contact him.
Mr. Chairman, I think we can skip this for now to go to the presenter.
No, he's joining now.
Okay, that's fine then.
Moise, Dr. Moise, are you with us?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, Doctor.
Okay,
so sorry for joining. I had some difficulties in getting back. So what item are we on now? Hello?
Item number 3.
Okay.
You should read the citation of the speaker, please.
Yes, Doctor, I'll start that now.
Okay, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So we have here with us Dr. Salihu Lukman, who is a professor at the Barton University in Saudi Arabia. So Dr. Salihu Lukman is a civil engineer by profession. He started his journey at the Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, which is Bachelor's of Engineering in Water Resources and Environmental Engineering. He also has his master's degree from the King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals, and then his PhD also from the same institution in 2013. So he has coordinated 3 bachelor's programs: Mechanical Civil Engineering and Chemical Engineering at Barton University, where he was responsible for various activities like teaching, as well as accreditation of those programs. So he has been involved in various researches, as well as various administrative roles, like being the chairman of the department, as well as a member of various international institutions. And he has numerous publications, chapters in books, as well as innovations. He has organized various workshops and conferences. His research interest includes water and wastewater facilities in Nigeria, as well as the use of local materials as adsorptive media, materials for heavy metals removal, and a host of other things. He's also involved in consultancy and is a registered member of the Nigerian Society of Engineers. So welcome Dr. Salihu Lukman to please begin his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Moise. Let me share my screen. Continuing the presentation. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, excellent. The presentation is clear and you are very clear.
Okay. Let me put it in the presentation mode. Okay. Oh, so can you see the presentation now?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. Thank you all. Welcome to this presentation titled Catastrophic Flood Events. Who is to blame? So I'll go straight to the outline, where we have the definition, worst floods in Nigeria, types of floods, drainage systems, floodplain, role of global warming, flood frequencies, flood forecasting and warnings, water power, who is to blame, and then conclusion. Now, catastrophic events. What is catastrophic? From Cambridge event, a sudden event that causes
from Nigeria.
very great trouble and destruction. So underline the three keywords. A sudden event which causes very great trouble and destruction. Of course, flood is one of those events which sometimes we consider as natural disaster. So we are going to see, is it all the time natural, or is there? And then, of course, flood, okay. Flood events refer to the severe and overwhelming flood that cause to human life, infrastructure, and the environment. This is very important to understand what catastrophic flood events are. Of course, all flood events, more often than not, they cause damage to human life because you have mortality, you have damage to infrastructure and the environment. We are going to dig deeper into all these different components as we proceed. And also these events are often characterized by the rapid and excessive accumulation of water, leading to the inundation of large areas of land. By inundation means submerging. You see, large areas of land become submerged. Like in this picture, you have, you know, the water level. I mean, not even water level, because this is flood is usually when you have water invading an ordinary, you know, a normal dry land. So this is a dry land. You have a building which has become completely flooded. People are just swimming to find how they can escape out of it. Now, Nigeria has been experiencing flood events over the years, or is more or less like an annual catastrophic event. This summary by Channels TV captures some of these devastating impacts of floods in Nigeria. 12, we have 363 dates, over 2.1 million people displaced. 2019, 158 dates, over 200,000 displaced. 2020, 68 dates, 129,000 displaced. 2021, 145 dates. 2022, 665 dates, and over 2.4 million displaced. Now, if you look at this data, you realize that 2012 and 2022, you know, they have the worst mortality rates as well as number of people displaced. In fact, over the years from 2012, Nigeria has experienced 3, you know, catastrophic flood events in 2012, 2018, and 2022. But the worst one of them is that of 2022, as you can see, 665 deaths and over 2.4 million displaced. And we should also remember that this, you know, data, sometimes they are being, you know, underestimated, because the actual mortality and the actual number of those displaced may not really be captured. Now, let's look at the worst floods in Nigeria, which is that of the 2022. Someone may say, what about 2023? Well, we will soon go into that and talk about it. But for now, we'll look at 2022, which so far, it is the worst flood it is unprecedented flood in Nigeria. It affected over 36 states out of 37 states when you include the FCT. And someone may ask, was it not predicted? Was there no forecast, flood forecasting and warning? Yes, there was. In 2022, Nigeria hydrological outlook. This is like forecast and advisory, in which the agency forecast the flood events and then analyze the areas that will be affected, analyze the number of households that will be affected, and publish in the AFO publication, so that various government agencies, federal government, states, and other federal government agencies can now start planning and try to avert or prevent such occurrence. Of course, the flood for the 2022 was caused by dam heavy rainfall and dam releases, poor drainage. Here is the heavy rainfall because we have increased rainfall. As we are going to see from 1950, the World Meteorological Organization has stated that the rainfall has increased in the globe by about 12%, and flood events have increased by over 30%. Of course, we are going to see later when we will begin to talk about the impact of climate change on flood, that within the same period from 1950 to date, the average temperature of the Earth has increased by 1.1 degrees Celsius. Of course, we will talk about that as we proceed. So here, for the 2022 flood, these are the causes: heavy rainfall, heavy downpour, which of course leads to dam releases, because the dams can no longer, they were in danger of being overtopped. So they released the excess water, which led to flooding of downstream areas as a result of one, poor drainage systems. And then for those in the coastal areas, you have sea level rise and tidal surges. These are the causes. And this is the map of actual flooded local government areas of Nigeria in 2022. Labeled, if you can see it in red. These were all the local governments affected. Like I mentioned, 33 states out of 37. That may be more than 90% of Nigeria experienced this, the 2022 floods. All these were labeled in red. You can see all parts, all the different regions, from the south-south to the southeast, to the southwest, north central, northeast, and northwest, northeast, and north central. So all the different regions were affected. Of course, these are some of the videos from the flood disaster in Lagos, some pictures. You can clearly see how buses, were submerged under the flood and how it caused damage to some streets, as well as another figure here from Delta State, how like a whole community has been submerged under the flood, because Delta is a coastal city. And then these are the key highlights: the breakdown of, the damage. That's why we call it catastrophic. Those affected, over 4.4 million were affected. And then those that died, if you look at it, there are those that are displaced 4, and then those that died 665. This is the area of farms that were affected and the number of houses damaged. So that of 2022 flood is really unprecedented in Nigerian history. But it is something that has been forecasted, and people were warned. We are going to discuss the details of the forecasting system as well as the warning system as we proceed. Now, this is like a general, like a startup. We'll now go into some of the technicalities. We will define some of the different types of floods we have, what is causing them, how can we mitigate, and then we go in well as what we can do, and ultimately look at who is to blame, which is the million-dollar question. So we have the flash and pluvial floods. Of course, flash floods, as the word implies, flash, rapid. It is rapid, localized flooding due to heavy rainfall. So usually for the flash flood, it occurs within short time, yet you have a torrential rainfall, a heavy downpour associated with severe thunderstorm, which in some instances, depending on the area, like coastal areas, you can have hurricane, tropical storm, and meltwater due to large flow into the rivers, and then subsequently it overflows the banks, and then the floodplains, and then the flood-prone areas will be affected and submerged. And they may also occur after the collapse of a natural ice or a dam. So you may have a dam break. Although you can have a dam break, like it happened recently in Libya in this month, which was the largest flood that Africa has ever experienced in a century. There were 2 dam breaks as a result of the flood. 2 dam breaks took place. And that led to huge amount of water that washed off a lot of buildings, cars, and all that. Over 4,000 people died in the Libya flood. So dam break is a catastrophic event. Of course, you also have dam release because of, like I mentioned, when you have heavy downpour, the reservoir level will tend to reach the maximum level, and dam operators will not allow that. So they discharge excess floods downstream. So downstream will now be at a risk of being flooded. We'll talk about the Lagudo Dam release that took place in August this year, 2023. We'll talk about it in the few slides to come. And of course, flash floods, they are distinguished from regular floods by having a time scale of less than 6 hours between rainfall and the onset of flooding. Because like I said, they are rapid. You have heavy downpour, and then when you go out, you look at all places like flooded. Of course, there are many causes to this, and they can occur anywhere in the country, but most common in low-lying areas with poor drainage. Drainage is one of the key words here, poor drainage. And flash floods can develop within minutes and can even occur miles away from where the storm hits. Then we have the pluvial floods, which are caused by heavy rainfall that exceeds the drainage capacity of an area. So pluvial flood is also like a subset of the flash flood, but the reason for the pluvial flood is that the rainfall exceeds the drainage capacity of the area. So drainage, when we are discussing about flood, is very, very important. Of course, we'll discuss that in greater details as we proceed. Now, drainage system, we mentioned that flash flood takes place very rapid, but of course, if you have a very good drainage system, at least that could reduce the impact and the consequences of such extreme events. But then pluvial floods specifically, it overwhelms the drainage system. When you don't have enough capacity for your drainage system, then definitely areas will be inundated. And now the drainage system, the provision of adequate drains, surface or sewers, especially for roads, and their efficient designs is essential for preventing flooding. It's one of the most important criteria or the most important step if you want to prevent flooding. Areas must be properly drained. Water must find its way. You either create a path, a waterway for it to move, or it will create its own way. That is the rule, but it must create its own way. And in so doing, if you allow it to create its own way by itself, then definitely damage to infrastructure will definitely result. So efficient design of drains is very important, because you may have some drains that are not efficient, whose capacity is not enough to drain the area. And then you may have some drains that will be turned into refuse dump. People dump refuse in drains, and when water comes, it cannot find a way to move. Then definitely it will spill over the banks and then flood the adjacent areas. This is another issue. So drain maintenance is very important. First, the provision and then the maintenance. Some areas do not even have it, while others that may have the drain, they are not properly maintained or designed. So efficient systems are designed to handle large volumes of water quickly and effectively. And this only happens when you have efficient design, which takes care of the capacity. And the capacity deals with the catchment area, the type of land cover, and the intensity of rainfall. Slope and alignment is very important, because without proper slope and alignment, the water will be there, and yet it will overflow and flood the adjacent areas. So slope and alignment is very important, as well as the material of construction. So all these are taken care of at the design stage. I'm very sure you must have seen some, drains or drainage systems that have collapsed. So drainage, provision of adequate drain cannot be overemphasized. Almost most of the flood events that you will see taking place, especially in Nigeria, one of the #1 root causes is inadequate drainage system. Either it doesn't exist in the first instance, or when it exists, it is not properly maintained, because people have just turned it into a dumping site, or some are building along waterways. They are building along waterways, thereby diverting the water to just move in any direction whenever you have a torrential rainfall. And the prevention, of course, is to reduce impervious surfaces, create green areas. There is also another type of drain flood, which is called urban flood, which is mostly caused as a result of the impervious surfaces that we have in the urban areas. Due to urbanization, you have a lot of paved roads, with concrete, with interlock tiles, and that reduces, the infiltration, the rate of infiltration into the soil. And then when you have heavy downpour, it runs off. And then if you don't have efficient drainage system, definitely it becomes a problem. So reduction of impervious surfaces and creating green areas, so that to enhance infiltration of heavy downpour or precipitation into the soil, and also maintenance of natural channels. I think I have emphasized on this. For instance, when you have roads must be adequately drained. That is very important. These are the different types of drainage systems that you have for roads, catch basin, gutter, and all that. Because when you don't provide the drainage system for roads, over time, the water will be undermining the sides of the roads, and then ultimately it will destroy the road completely. So one of the precautions for efficient design of roads is drainage, is to provide adequate drainage system. Otherwise, the road will not stand the test of time. Now, the next type is the riverine flood. As the name implies, riverine, it affects rivers. It emanates from the rivers. And of course, when river overflows, it banks and inundates the surrounding land. Various causes to this, because you have river flow. Some rivers flow perennially, throughout the year, some during rainy season. So heavy downpour affects the flow. Of course, the carrying capacity of the river will be affected, and then it overflows over the banks and inundates the surrounding land. And then heavy, like snow melt in areas that have snow. When you have snow melt, they will melt and then join the river flow, thereby increasing the level. Then storm surges associated with hurricanes and other coastal storms can also cause river flooding in coastal areas, because the storm surges now flow inland and then may affect the river flow, and then thereby affecting the adjacent areas. I discussed about the dam failures and releases. All this, because dams are created, they are simply like an embankment, a barrier across the flow of a river. Dams are created across rivers more often than not. So once you have dam break, it means the river flow, the millions or billions cubic meter of water that has been stored in the reservoir will be released instantly. And definitely such amount of water will just sweep away the downstream, infrastructure. And then you have siltation. Siltation is caused by erosion. Siltation is the settlement, because when river flows, it carries sediments. So when there is so much erosion, those sediments, as they move on, depending on their size and other factors, the velocity, it will settle down. When they settle down, they may settle down and reduce the effective capacity of the river, thereby raising the riverbed and then reducing its capacity. And once the capacity is reduced, then definitely it will spill over the banks and then flood the adjacent floodplain and flood-prone areas. And then we have deforestation and urbanization as well. Deforestation, due to climate change and due to anthropogenic activities, when plants and trees are cut down and all that, when we destroy green areas, definitely we are reducing the infiltration capacity of the soils. And in that case, you have more runoff being created. Now, for the riverine flood, one of the most important factor we need to discuss is the floodplain, because river, they usually are sometimes, close to residential areas. But then what is a floodplain? It's an area of land that is susceptible to flooding because it is close to the river, and it is found along rivers and streams and also coastal areas. So floodplains should be delineated, because once they are delineated, then you now have flood prone areas. And those areas, it means they should be evacuated. Like what you have here in this picture, you have the river flowing. This is the river flowing, and this is the 10-year flood. From the 10-year data that was available, a flood can reach up to this level. This is the 50-year flood, which is meaning based on 50-year flood data that we have. So it will be exceeded once in 50 years, because the more the years, the higher you go. So this is 100-year return flood. This is 500 years. Of course, all these are probabilistic because you employ some confidence level, 90% confidence level that, okay, this flood will be exceeded in 10 years, in 50 years, and all of that. So floodplains can be delineated using several factors like historical flood data. If an area is known to have been flooded before, then that is, a very good indication that people should keep off from that area, the flooded area, and also topographic data, such that if you have low-lying areas, which is based on the topography, like a valley, without good drainage system, it is most likely to be flooded. Then such areas should be provided with adequate drainage and steps for avoiding disastrous flood, sweeping the area. And then you have the watershed flood modeling. Watershed is simply an area of land that is being drained by a single outlet. Usually rivers and streams, they serve as the outlet, draining areas. When you have rivers and streams, when you have rainfall, the channels, the gutters, and all that, they ultimately feed into the rivers. And the rivers and streams, their final destination is more often than not, the ocean, the sea, sometimes to the lakes. Okay. So the watershed modeling, the flow modeling, it measures usually the peak flow based on, the characteristics. Based on the characteristics of the basin or catchment or watershed. And there are basically three methods, the rational method, and then the Horton's model, and we have the curve number developed by the US Soil Conservation Service, which is implemented. Of these three, the Horton's model is the best, is the most accurate, but very difficult to apply, followed by the curve number, and then the rational method. So the curve number method is being implemented in the HMS, which is the Hydrologic Engineering Center of the US Army Corps of Engineers. And HMS is the hydrologic modeling system, So this is a free and open source software that one can use to determine the peak flow rate, as well as some flood assessment. Then there is the SWAT. The SWAT is also developed by the US Agricultural Department. The full meaning is Soil and Water Assessment Tool. It is also very good at, predicting flood events in a given watershed. And these two, the SWAT, between the SWAT and the HMS, the SWAT has, much better accuracy than the HMS, although they are all implementing the curve number method. But many countries are using the SWAT in flood forecasting. So Nigeria is also using the SWAT, although before it was using both the HMS and the SWAT. But now for the 2023 flood forecast in the annual flood outlook, it is using only the SWAT. Then you have the hydraulic modeling, which is quantitative. Of course, the input from the HMS determining the peak flow will now be used in determining the flood-prone areas using the HECRAS. HECRAS is the river analysis system. And then you have other software also that can do the same thing, the Mike Flood, Top Flow, etc. But all the remaining the others, they are commercial software. But HECRAS is a free and open source software developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is very good at flood-prone delineation, and can also be incorporated into GIS to do a lot of other, GIS analysis. Then you also have the GIS remote sensing, which for the GIS and remote sensing, usually the NIMET, the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, use the GIS and remote sensing. And then all this, the HECRAS, you have to fit also probability distributions, different probability distribution, because I told you about the return period is probabilistic, that will take us into stochastic hydrology and all that. So we will not go deep into that. Now, you have like this area, you have the river, this is the river channel, and this is the frequent flood plain. This is the frequent flood plain. Of course, the area should be evacuated, definitely. Then you have the occasional flood plain, which is further. Okay, this is the occasional flood plain. And then you have the exceptional. Well, whatever is the case, especially the frequent flood plain, there shouldn't be any infrastructure there, as well as even the occasional. Okay, because occasional, depending on the return period, you can still have the areas inundated. So in such a case, one needs to be far away as much as possible from a river channel as possible, because floodplain, flood-prone areas, sometimes you have people building, close to the rivers and all that. Of course, the government also has a very key role to play in trying to make sure that along a waterway, no building, along the flood plain or flood-prone areas, no infrastructure should be there. So all this we are going to discuss as we proceed. Now, the coastal floods, like I mentioned, usually for the coastal areas, so due to the flow of the sea, caused by the inundation of low-lying coastal areas by seawater. So here you have storm surges, tsunamis, and sea level rise. And all this, they affect those areas in the flood, in the coastal areas. Of course, it's not only the damage, it's not only due to the coastal flow, but sometimes the coastal areas also experience heavy rainfall, which will also, flood the areas. So they have two factors. You have the heavy rainfall, and then you have the inundation due to the flood, the sea water coming inland. Of course, provision of, such as levees, sea walls, and all that, it will help in preventing such damages. But one important factor here is the fact that we must have good drainage system, and then building sea walls and elevated buildings and infrastructure and other coastal defenses. So buildings near the coastal areas should be elevated so that even when water, from the sea makes its way inland, then they are elevated up such that the infrastructure will not be damaged. Now, the role of global warming. We have sunlight, solar radiation, and infrared heating. We receive solar radiation from the sun, and then the earth absorbs the solar radiation and then re-radiates heat in form of infrared, which are trapped by our atmosphere or by the greenhouse gases. So now we'll briefly talk about albedo, which is the reflectance of incoming solar radiation by celestial bodies like planets. Okay, so Earth has albedo of 0.3. What does that mean? It means that of the solar radiation that the Earth receives and its atmosphere, it will reflect only 30%. It will reflect 30% of the solar radiation, meaning it will absorb 70%. Absorbing that 70% definitely will heat up the Earth, and then it will release that absorbed heat in form of infrared, and then you have the greenhouse gases, the carbon dioxide, water vapor, the nitrous oxide, and methane. These are the most famous greenhouse gases, which initially absorb this infrared and then emit them back to Earth, thereby heating the Earth gradually. So the Earth is gradually being heated. For instance, the moon's albedo is 0.12, meaning that the moon reflects only 12% of the solar radiation it receives from the sun. Only 12%. And that definitely will mean that the moon will be hotter. Average temperature in the day in the equator of the moon is 127. Definitely, I mean, one cannot live there, 127 degrees Celsius. While at night, it quickly loses that heat because the moon does not have atmosphere. While here on Earth, we have atmosphere, which traps. Our atmosphere is up to about 100 kilometers long. So that atmosphere traps the heat radiated by the Earth in form of infrared. And that is why now our temperature is trapped, while for this moon, it is quickly cooled to minus 173. So that cooling, trapping of the infrared by the greenhouse gases leads to rise in the average Earth temperature by 1.1 degrees Celsius from 1950 to date. And that has grave consequences. We have the glaciers. The glaciers are on the land surface, the glaciers and the ice caps, which form 2% of the unavailable fresh water. 2% of the total fresh water that we have on Earth is in glaciers and ice caps. Okay, we have the icebergs which are floating on the sea. That one, even if it melts, there is no issue. It will not raise the sea level when icebergs melt because they are already in the sea. So melting of icebergs in oceans and seas will not raise the sea level, but melting of glaciers and ice caps and permafrost, which will later flow down to the sea, will lead to rise in the sea level. And rise in sea level definitely will affect coastal areas. The rise in sea level is one due to the melting of these glaciers and the ice caps in the Arctic and Antarctic regions, as well as the rise in average temperature of the Earth. You can imagine when temperature rises, definitely, you know, the water molecules, they expand. And when they expand, they increase in volume. Although you may say, oh, the rise is just maybe very small, 2 millimeters, 5 centimeter, 10 centimeter. But when you translate that in terms of ocean level, that is disastrous. That is disastrous. Okay, so we have them, and then all this, you know, climate change issues. I mean, the global warming will lead to climate change because the wind directions will change, and once the wind is affected, we will have wildfires and all that, and then the rainfall will change. You know, the amount of rainfall will be affected, as well as we will have heavier rainfall as sea level rise, stronger winds, and more flood events. Now, I talked about the rise in sea level due to the rise in temperature, the average temperature of the sea. There is evaporation. This is water cycle. I'm sure probably we did it in geography, and you know, what the water cycle is talking about, you know, the different stages that the water passes through on Earth. That is on the average about 1.37 billion cubic kilometers. 1.37 billion cubic kilometers of water on Earth. That's approximately 1.4. And the water is in different phases of the water cycle, in the ocean, in the condensed form, in the clouds, as well as groundwater, lakes, rivers, and streams, as well as glaciers and ice caps and icebergs. So when you have increase in temperature, then definitely the rate of evaporation will increase and the average air temperature will increase. Warm air holds more moisture. So we will have the rate of evaporation being increased. When the rate of evaporation increases, then you will have more clouds. When you have more water in the clouds, then definitely you will have more rainfall. So this is the explanation behind the fact that you have the increase in rainfall from 1950 to date by about 12%, because the average rate of evaporation has increased, thereby increasing the amount of rainfall in the atmosphere, in the clouds. Consequently, this rainfall will come down as precipitation, as rainfall, as downpour. So the rate of rainfall, we have torrential rainfall. Now, flood frequencies from 2011 to 2020. This is a one-decade study conducted by Umar and Gray this year. And these are the data for the different regions in Nigeria, where you have the north west having the highest, followed by the north central and the northeast. These are the flood events, the number of frequencies that flood took place for all these years. You can see from 2011, you can see 2012 has the highest because it stopped. The data is from 2011 to 2020. It does not include 2022. So here 2012 has the highest frequency, followed by 2015 and 2017. Okay, that is in terms of frequency. But in terms of devastating impact, we are going to see that 2012 and 2018 and then 2022 have the highest, catastrophic impact in terms of mortality as well as number of people displaced. So here you can see the list is the southeast, then the south, and these are the states that have more than 5 incidences of floods. Here, most of the states are in the north, but as we are going to see the 2022 and 2023, the flood really has made its way into the south. Now, these are all the local governments affected in Nigeria, all the different local governments that have been affected within this period. Now, this is the 2018 flood statistics from the map, from the mortality rate, those affected, the fatalities, the area of the injured people, externally displaced and damaged houses, affected people. All the data is provided here. Here, the number of those died, 108, and those that were displaced, 441,000. Okay, and this is the rainfall event, and these are the areas affected. And then these are the different amount of rainfall that has fallen over Nigeria. When you look at it clearly, you can see the amount, the highest here greater than 600 millimeter. You can see around this area, and then mostly is between maybe 100 to 500. And then the amount of those displaced are indicated per state. You can see it. And then the summary is provided here. So this is the 2018 flood, which is one of the worst flood events that has affected Nigeria. I told you about the 2012, 2018, and 2022. 2022 being the worst, the unprecedented one in Nigerian history. Now, coming down to the recent event that took place, in Lagdo Dam, release from Cameroon. This is the map of the Lagdo Dam. It's along the river Benue, which flows into Yola, Adamawa, and then down to Benue. So due to the torrential rainfall, due to the heavy downpour of rainfall they experienced, the dam level was about reaching the maximum level, the maximum allowable level. So they had to release the flood waters so that the dam will not be overtopped. So it started, it's located in Cameroon on River Benue. So they started releasing the water on 23rd August, and they took 1 week releasing it in the River Benue. And of course, Nigeria was panicking because it was afraid that those areas, because as you can see, the river, it is flowing from Cameroon and then into Yola and then into Bukari and then Benue. So they were afraid of flood taking place along the river downstream. But then the amount of the flood of the released water, initially they started releasing about 200 meter cube per second. Then later they reduced to 50 meter cube per second until the end, up to the 28th of August. And then the National Hydrological Services Agency confirmed and allayed the fears of Nigerians that such release will not result in flooding. Of course, we have experienced flooding in Nigeria, but it wasn't as a result of the Lagdo Dam release, which is not responsible for the flood. Now, I told you about the annual flood outlook that the National Hydrological Service Agency presents as forecast and advisory. So this is for 2023. These are the areas with red that are likely to have, that are at high risk of flooding based on the model that they run. So these areas will all have high risk flooding. See, most of them are located along the River Niger, River Benue, and the confluence and downstream like that. So, and then the yellow shaded areas are those with moderate risk of flooding. Now, this is the map of actual flooded areas in 2022, which is the worst flood, like I told you. So now if you compare the 2022 flood, the actual flooded areas in 2022 with the forecasted flooded areas of 2023, with the 2023, it is estimated that about 32 states will be affected. 32 states out of the 37. In 2022, 33 states were actually affected. But like I mentioned, the NISA issued the forecast and advisory for 2022 about the flood. We'll go and talk about that as we proceed. So when you look at it clearly, probably the 2023 will be less flooded based on the areas to be affected. This is 2022, but the actual data that we are going to have at the end of the rainy season and the analysis will testify whether it's going to be less or more. We are hoping that it shouldn't be up to the level of that of 2022, because that was really disastrous. It was disastrous. Now, forecasting floods, flood forecasting and warnings. Someone may ask, so these natural disasters, don't we have like advanced warning system? Yes, we do. And to my greatest surprise, they are really doing excellently well in terms of analyzing the, trying to forecast exactly what will happen, the areas affected, and even by the amount of households that will be affected, as well as the duration that it is going to take place. So it cannot be more explicit that, than what they currently have. But of course, we know sometimes we don't listen and the government may not do what it is supposed to do. We'll look into this. You have the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, which is the one that is saddled with the responsibility of forecasting and warning about floods. Of course, it is hydrological agency, so it uses the hydrological modeling to forecast flooded areas. Yes, they use, like I mentioned before, HEC, HMS, and SWAT, but for their 2023 forecast, they use only the SWAT, which is the Soil and Water Assessment Tool. The SWAT is a very good tool for assessing the flood-prone areas, as well as, for calculating infiltration, evaporation, and several other things. Then, secondly, you have the NIMET. The NIMET, which is the Nigerian Meteorological Agency. The NIMET usually issues the forecast for weather patterns like temperature, rainfall, and then relative humidity. But then that rainfall will now be used by NISA to now run into the hydrological models in order to determine the river levels, the maximum, the peak flow. And from the peak flow, now they can now determine those areas that could be flooded, the flood-prone areas, and then try to issue advisory so that the national emergency management agencies can now start to plan for the flooded areas. First to ensure, anything that should be done, and then if in the unlikely event that those areas are flooded, then NEMA will now come and try to issue, to provide certain services, relief services. We have NEMA and we have the Red Cross also, the International Red Cross Organization. They are also part of the emergency services in case of flood. Now, NEMA also, they use GIS for flood data analysis. And then this is like a sample of NIMET where it is predicting the rainfall. You can see where you have from the coastal areas of south and southwest, the rainfall is higher. And then based on that, that will serve as input for the Hydrological Services Agency now to try and predict the river levels. So this is the prediction 2023 for the flooded areas. This is the table provided in the annual flood outlook of 2023, you can see specifically mentioning, state by state and the number of local governments, as well as the number of household or communities to be affected, by some radius, 2 kilometer, 3 kilometer, and 5 kilometer, as well as the period that the flood is going to take place. So this cannot be more explicit than this. So this they provide so that, research institutes, government agencies, both at federal and state levels, should start preparing, doing the needful, ensuring the drains are okay, ensuring if there is need for evacuation of some communities, that is done. But sometimes, some of these things, I don't know. Well, I say they fall on deaf ears, I don't know, but because with what happened in 2022, when, there was adequate flood forecasting and advisory about the flood events, yet the flood was allowed to take place. And like I said, one of the major factors, leading to these floods are poor drainage systems. Poor drainage systems. In some instances, they don't exist. Where they exist, they are not properly maintained. Areas are not properly drained. Building on waterways, dumping refuse on waterways, and all sorts of things. Now, water power.
Professor.
Yes.
We have just 10 minutes left. I hope
10
we can
minutes.
finish.
Okay, yes, we can finish.
All right,
yes.
Thank you so much.
I think I have just a few more slides to go. So
all right,
water
excellent.
power. All right. So all this will tell you, what all these, catastrophic events will tell you is about water power. Water has great power. You can imagine just 1 meter cube of water containing 1,000 liters, of, good quality water will weigh 1 ton, 1,000 kilograms. So when you have huge amount of water flowing with high velocity, the momentum is enormous. The momentum is enormous. And that is why flood events are disastrous and catastrophic, because they can cause a lot of damages. When you have hydropower, when it collapses, it can lead to dam breaks, which can lead to flooding of downstream sections. You can have transportation infrastructure being destroyed. You can see in this figure where a road, where a bridge collapses. So transportation infrastructure can be affected, water mains, sewer mains, all this can be destroyed during flood events, as well as energy infrastructure, such as, let's say, power supply infrastructure like the poles and all that. That's why more often than not, the power holding company, whenever there is rainfall, they switch off the light until it is over, because whenever there is any, issue that is happening with the cables, then it can affect the transformer. So more often than not, they switch it off, and then after the rainfall, they put the area back in service to avoid damage to their infrastructure. Of course, it can damage buildings, as we can see. It can lead to high mortality. People, getting drowned and people getting swept over by the flood. Of course, there are some preventive measures, which include building flood defenses like levees, dams, and seawalls. And then we have elevating infrastructure above the flood plain. You can see from this picture, if this is a flood level, you can see this, built on stilts, they are above the flood level. So in case of, flood event, such buildings, even though they are somehow close to the river, but they will not be flooded, depending, of course, on the magnitude of the flood. Then you have designing infrastructure to withstand flooding by using materials and construction methods that are resistant to damage from water. We build, even earthquake-resistant buildings. So if we can build earthquake-resistant buildings, then definitely we can do the same for flood-resistant buildings as well. And then developing flood warning systems. Whenever there will be heavy rainfall, you will hear NIMET announcing that, okay, in so-so state, there will be heavy downpour, so be careful, don't go into flooded waters and all that. Now, who is to blame? We have analyzed, all the causes, the different types of floods. Now, the million-dollar question is, who is to blame? Is it the climate change? We have explained the impact of climate on how it leads to heavy downpour of rainfall. When you have heavy downpour, then all other facets of flood will set in. Dam break, river flow rise, sea level, and all that. So climate change, yes, is one of the main causes of flood. But are we to blame climate change? are we not the guys who are warming the earth? Are we not, the source of the global warming? Yes, we are. Our burning of fossil fuels, our emission of greenhouse gases have increased the greenhouse concentration in the atmosphere, thereby gradually warming the planet. And once it is warmed, then the climate change will set in. So you can say that the climate change is partly our own doing. And that is why several countries are working towards reducing the emission of those greenhouse gases. Then you have now the government. Are we to blame the government? Is the government responsible? Well, you can see all the different advisories. Provision of adequate drains, yes, is a responsibility of the government to provide adequate drains, especially along roadways. But what about our own houses, in front of our houses? Are we not responsible? You can have someone without any drain. So do the ones that you can. Make sure your houses are adequately having good drainage networks. And when it is, you ensure that it is properly maintained. And the government should do, what it takes to ensure that all roadways and all, they are properly drained, as well as cities, to avoid flooding or urban flooding. Now, ourselves, yes, anthropogenic activities. Some, it's part, we share part of this blame, because we build houses sometimes on floodplains, on, flood-prone areas, near streams and rivers, or even along waterways. Definitely, in that case, we are the ones to blame. So each and every one of us should do the needful, should do what it takes to reduce flooding, ensure that your houses are properly drained, ensure that you have drainage networks in your areas, and then the remaining part, the government should take care of that. Now, God, yes, some will say, this is my destiny. No, I cannot change. No, I cannot do anything. Yes, you can do something. If God has given you the ability to forecast the occurrence of this catastrophic event, then, hands off. The rest is up to you to heed that warning. If you don't heed the warning, and then that disaster strikes you, and then you raise up and say, this is my destiny. God has already destined that this will happen. If God didn't give you this knowledge, this advanced warning system, this forecast, then you can say, this is just destiny. But God in his infinite mercy has given us the mathematical knowledge, the advanced tools, the forecasting tools to predict these catastrophic events. But sometimes we don't heed to these warnings. And that is one of the major reasons, that we are having this mess. Now, further reading, you have the AFO, the Annual Flood Outlook 2023. They started from 2020. So you have 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. This is a very, very nice and good publication. And you have this review paper by Umar and Gray, 2023. And you have the NIMED publication on Climate and Health Bulletin, July 2023. Now, in conclusion, Nigeria is facing recurring catastrophic flood events. And like I mentioned at the beginning, this happens every year, every blessed year, with some years having, more severe floods than others. But it is a recurring event now, and all hands must be on deck. All hands must be on deck, both the government agencies, our leaders, as well as individuals must have the proper understanding of drainage system, maintaining our drainage system, and then ensuring that we don't build along a waterway and close to a floodplain. Of course, many countries, it is not Nigeria that is facing this catastrophe. Many countries are also facing increased flood events. Libya, like I mentioned, lost 4,000 lives in this month of September, which is the worst flood event in Africa in a century. Of course, other countries in 2023 also, like Australia, South Africa, Brazil, and the US, they also face catastrophic flood events. So like I mentioned, all hands should be on deck to curtail these flood events, and we must individually put efforts to mitigate climate change we should prioritize it. The government should prioritize it, and we should also prioritize it when buying any equipment. Try to buy the energy efficient one. Those of us that have generators back in Nigeria, make sure as much as possible, if you can afford solar alternative solution rather than using, of course, now even, you know, the price of petrol is so high that it is forcing people to abandon their generators and look for solar alternatives, which is very clean energy. Thank you for listening. And then we have the Q&A session. You can pass your comments, questions, and all that.
Thank you, Professor Salihu Lukman, for the very interesting and enlightening presentation. We had a lot of engagement. Many people actually want to see the slides. So we hope that our professor will share the slides with us so we can share it with the people.
Okay, sure. As soon as we finish, I will send you the slide.
Excellent. So I think we have time for just 2 questions because of it's quite late. So let's start with question 1. We have Engineer Ibrahim. He says here that how feasible is it to create an artificial river channel to transfer water from floodplains into Lake Chad? So basically he's asking about how to create artificial river channels to move the floods or to move the water from flood areas into Lake Chad. How feasible is that?
Well, that will depend on the area. You are talking about Lake Chad, which is in the northeast. So if you look at the data that we have, let me quickly scroll back to the map that we have. If you look at it, the northeast, like in 2023, based on the prediction, the northeast is not having like serious, it's not under serious threat of flooding. So saying that, I mean, talking about Lake Chad, like I mentioned, is around Maiduguri. So does it experience serious flooding that there is need to create artificial river? Of course, we can create if there is need. Like this Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was artificial canal, which, you know, connected, I mean, make the trips of the cargos shorter. So we can, artificial river can be created if there is need, of course. But I don't see the Northwest as having like under serious threat of flooding based on the current data that we have.
All right, thank you so much, Professor. We have one question, and then after that, we also leave the floor open for one person to ask the question as well. So we take the question of Engineer Titi at DMO. She says here that what are the likely mitigation procedure to prevent year in, year out effect of flooding in our floodplain location? So she's basically asking about mitigation procedures.
Yes, like I mentioned the mitigation procedures. The one, I mean, the number one is provision of adequate drainage system in our urban and even rural areas, because drainage system is simply draining the land when you have heavy precipitation. And this is, I mean, the number one cause of flooding in Nigeria. This has been identified by both NIMED and by the Nigeria Hydrological Service Agency drainage system. So we must have adequate drainage system. That is number one. And then 2, the government must ensure that floodplains, I mean, nobody builds on flood-prone areas. People are building on flood-prone areas. And when you have disaster or flood, they will say, this is my destiny. They will buy plots on the floodplain and build. And when you have heavy downpour, it will wash them away. Then they will now blame God that this is my destiny. So the government must ensure that floodplains are like separated and demarcated. Nobody builds there. People are building along waterways. When you build along a waterway, when you have heavy downpour, then it will create a way. I just talk about the water power. When it comes, it has to find a way. Because of the power, it has to find a way. You either give it a way or it creates its own way. So you have the maintenance of the channels as well. Then the advisory. sincerely speaking, this advisory is so detailed, the focus is so excellent that if our government agencies, the state governments and all that will look at them and do the needful and try to prevent, because prevention is better than cure. Like I told you, the 2022 was adequately and accurately forecasted by NHSA, yet it was allowed to take place. So our government must be serious, Although after the 2022, the federal government instituted a presidential committee on flood and all that after the 2022 flood event. But like I said, we have the tools, we have the adequate forecast and advisory that was issued by the NIHSA. Yet it was allowed to take place. So these are some of the few, mitigation measures that I can say.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think now we have one person, Engineer Maruf. Please, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Dr. Lukman, for that beautiful presentation. I'm just worried about the recent proclamation of the Minister for Works that most of Nigerian roads are going to be made in concrete. And I know when concrete is used, it's definitely it enhances building up of runoff and perhaps could have a kind of impact on drainage efficiency. What is your take on that? Would you prefer that our roads are made of concrete or other alternatives like flexible pavement? What's going to be your take as an environmentalist on that initiative? That is my question.
Okay. One, you see, whether asphalt, the normal tarred road, whether concrete, they all don't allow infiltration through the road. So they all you crown the road and then the water, when it falls, it goes off. It goes down to the maybe the drainage system. So to me, based on my understanding, whether concrete, whether tarred roads, they all are impervious. So they don't allow water to pass through them. Now, the issue of using either reinforced concrete as roads or tarred roads, the point the minister made was the fact that reinforced concrete are more durable than tarred roads. They are more durable, they will stand, more pressure than tarred roads. And on that ground, he proposed the concrete roads. You can imagine, we all can testify to this because all this, the overhead bridges, the flyovers, they are all reinforced concrete first. And then you now lay a layer of tarred and of asphalt and all that. And this, he was not the first person to advocate this. Some years back, Dangote proposed that the federal government should be using concrete roads. He said that it is more durable than the tarred roads that we currently have. He proposed this, and I think he was given a contract of a road segment in Lagos. I don't remember the area from which area, but it is a very long reach, several kilometers. It was given to Dangote to construct reinforced concrete roads, which he is currently doing. So it is something that we can test and then see, but based on their own submission, they really, really advocate that it is much more stronger and resilient than the tarred roads. Of course, this will depend on several factors. The quality control. Because we all know you can build buildings and it collapses and all that. So will the quality be enhanced? Sometimes building tarred roads, you realize when they are building it, then you are having potholes. You can see from Abuja to Kano, the road that they are building. Some segments have started to develop potholes even before the roads were completed. But probably if you have a very well-built, RC road, it may be better than what we currently have. But in courts, like I said, depending on the quality of the material, because you can have reinforced concrete building which also collapses. So this is my take on the matter.
Thank you so much, Professor Lukman. I think now we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. I know a lot of people still have questions, but I've added the link to our WhatsApp group in the chat section. You can join the group and then you can engage further with the lecturer in the group. So we'll move on to the next session. I think that now we should have Dr. Abdulsami.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Moise. On behalf of the Executive Eastern Province Branch, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we want to appreciate our erudite scholar, Dr. Salihu Lukman, for the excellent presentation. It is highly informative and educative. Secondly, we appreciate your time and effort. And also, we want to appreciate all our members here in the Kingdom. I can see Professor Noor Dalat and other members from Dammam, from Jubail, from Afribatin. We appreciate you all. Also, our members from Dubai, we also appreciate you. I can see Leke, and we have our brother from Qatar. Then also we have a large member from Nigeria. I can see Engineer Bernard from Kaduna branch. We have Engineer Udo, Engineer Najib, and so many other, Engineer Titi and Engineer Joseph. And finally, we want to appreciate the technical secretary for coming up with this brilliant topic. And also Prof. Moruf has raised a very important topic, the use of rigid pavements. Probably we're going to consider that in our future technical section. So we've have some requests for the slides. So after we get it from the presenter, we're going to share it to the given email. Also, we appreciate our Professor of Mathematics, Professor Tijani Apalara, for joining us. We really appreciate, sir. And I have just one piece of information for us. We have a survey on the general group regarding the forthcoming inauguration. So we want to appeal to our members to go to the WhatsApp forum to answer the question on the survey. So thank you very much. Hope to see you in our next technical section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdulsami. I think we have time for a few words from our chairman, Dr. Abdullah.
Okay, thank you very much. Really, it's a long day. Anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Salihu Lukman, for an excellent presentation and for sparing time to attend this event, despite your tight schedule. I'm sure we have all benefited a lot. I would like to thank the steering committee of the NSC Eastern Province Branch for a well-coordinated event. Last but not the least, a heartfelt thank you to everyone who came out to support this event and for the presence at the gathering. To our presenter, just to let you know that your certificate of appreciation is on the way. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you too.
Thank you so much,
Mr.
Chairman. I think at this stage now we have 1 minute for the group photograph. So if you don't mind, you can open your cameras. And then we can take a snapshot of the session attendees. Okay, just give me 1 minute. Hold on. Still need to take one more. All right, there we have it. So can someone please move the motion for adjournment? Anyone?
I move.
Hi, Dr. Maruf is moving a motion of adjournment to the next meeting or next technical session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maruf. Anyone seconding? All right, thank you so much. By the way, the slides will be shared in the group. Also, those that have shared their emails, the slides will be shared with you, and all other correspondences will be in the WhatsApp group. Thank you all for attending, and see you next time.
Thank you. Good night. Salam alaikum.
Good night. Alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Harun yanzu.
Thank you. Dr. Moise, how are you, sir? My chairman, how are you, sir? You have the light.
Assalamu alaikum. Engineer Abdul Salam, how are you?
Life here, close, sir.
Nice to
How's
meet you.
everything? Nice to meet you, sir.
Alhamdulillah. How is your side there? How is Qatar?
Qatar, alhamdulillah, everything is fine, actually.
Okay, excellent. How's the family?
Family, sir.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, so I'm.
That's very. Alhamdulillah, everything is fine. Alhamdulillah.
So, mashallah, Allah will give you